This is a continuation of our Living the Way series. We're looking at chapter 7 of Matthew, and chapter 7 of Matthew is all about righteous living, which is a big word as it carries a lot of weight, but really all it means is this is the way to live in a good and right relationship with God and with your neighbor. And today we're going to be preaching on the text that Jim just read. If you look at this is Woodward Avenue Baptist or Presbyterian Church in Detroit, Michigan. And if you were to look up that church and look and study its beginning is not much different than Advent United Methodist Church. Very similar, even though a different building size. In 1911, in response to a growing number of new residents moving into the Piety Hill neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan, the Presbyterian Church felt a need to build a church to serve the people. And the growth was influenced by this new startup company that was just a couple of miles away called the Ford Motor Company. And they were getting to release one of their, the car that really made them, the Model T Ford. They raised the equivalent of today, what would be today, $3 million to build the building. Although honestly, when I look at that structure and when you get into the inside of that building, there's no way you could build that for anything less than $50 million today. And 10 years after its opening in 1921, Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church had grown to over 2,200 members. But no one saw the changes to come, even though they should have. By 1950, Piety Hill neighborhood began to suffer a common American ailment called white flight. As the city grew out into the suburbs, white families left for communities farther north. They were replaced by a black workforce gaining jobs at the Ford plant. And the once all-white neighborhood of wealthy entrepreneurs was now filled with blue-collar workers with a different skin color. Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church did not adapt. By 1961, church membership dropped to 1,000. By 1971, it was 400. By 1991, they had dropped all the way down to 200 remaining members. Steps were taken to revitalize the church, but nothing took hold. Finally, in 2005, the doors were permanently closed for worship. If you were able to peek inside the church, with thanks to modern technology we can, you can look at that abandoned sanctuary and see both the life that was and the death that is in a house of worship. There was a time in that sanctuary that the congregation boldly and confidently sang, "Great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning, new mercies I see, all I have needed, thy hand hath provided, great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me." But the song that truly claimed her soul was something different. It's a song without a formal tune or set words. The song was more spoken than sung. It's called We Used To. It's the We Used To song. We used to have people. We used to do great things. We used to have committed people. We used to have a big choir. We used to have good families. We used to have song is so cool because you can write your own words to the melody, and it has a context that is very versatile. It's a song as old as time. Matter of fact, Jesus even knew the tune. He knew you were going to sing it. He warns us about singing it in Matthew 7:13. He says it's an easy tune to learn and memorize, but it is a song that leads to destruction, and many people love singing it. Or, as Jim read, the gate that leads to destruction is broad and the road is wide. So many people enter through it, but the gate that leads to life is narrow. To understand the sermon and where I'm heading with it, you need to change how you hear these words from Jesus. Because preachers throughout history have robbed them of their original intent. They've chosen instead for judgment and condemnation. Evangelical preachers who used to host camp meetings, which was a very familiar thing in my congregation in Pennsylvania. They would hold these camp meetings and they were revivals, and they would ask people to come to the altar and commit their lives to Jesus. And they made this whole reading about personal faith. Are you walking in the narrow path, or are you choosing the wide open path of destruction? Are you walking in the light, or are you stumbling in darkness? Christianity across denominations is filled with personal performance interpretation of these words. Are you good or are you bad? Are you faithful or are you faithless? Are you in the light or are you in the darkness? Truthfully, it's hard for me even to listen to our reading this morning without thinking to myself, I'm going through a personal assessment as Jim's reading and going, am I going to hell or not? I got to remember, I don't know. Am I in the narrow road or am I on the wide open road? Both through experiences in the church and my reading and studying of Scripture, I've had a radical change about these words and words like them. Jesus' understanding of reward or punishment is not off in some distant reckoning of faith. You've probably heard a million times, when you meet Peter at the pearly gates and he's assessing your life, there is nothing about Peter in the pearly gates in the Bible. It's not there. It's what somebody put into the Bible. Instead, Jesus is talking to you about right here and right now. He is about right here, right now for those who are listening to the sermon in its original time and for us who listen now. Jesus is sharing a lesson grounded in wisdom, not a warning about eternal damnation. In Judaism, those who chose wisdom find life. Those who choose to ignore wisdom find difficulty and destruction, not in the future, but in the present. Wisdom is the wisdom of God, and it's a present reality that blows through the universe all the time that you can touch anytime you want to. There is no or else. Consider the daily Jewish prayer, what's called the Shema. It had nothing to do with heaven or hell. Everything with living each day of the life, and Jews were taught to pray this prayer every single day. Love the Lord your God with all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. There is no or else with that prayer. Those who love the Lord in their daily life, they serve their neighbor. Because when you serve your neighbor, you are also serving the Lord, and this is the path to abundant life. But it is a narrow path because it means you'll have to work. You don't have the ability to read the Greek, but in chapter 7 of Matthew, the Greek word poieo is used 11 times. And this is a verb that's translated as do or doing. And Matthew chooses to write this in the present tense, meaning that what is being stressed is continuous, repeated actions. The use of poieo is concerned about what one is doing in the present and not what someone did in the past. I learned the depth of this lesson while serving as a camp director. The hidden gift of being a camp director or a director of a Christian camp is that you gain access into the realities of hundreds of different churches. When I was with New York, I worked with 200 different congregations. In Iowa, in addition to my camp duties, I ended up serving more than 30 congregations, helping them transition between pastors, helping them to recommit some of their ministries and teaching them how to move forward. And in serving the churches, the truth and meaning of Jesus' intent with this message became abundantly clear. Through my experiences, I have learned that comfort equals death. In your home, most people work hard to create a comfortable life because that type of comfort creates security, it creates peace. But this is not true in a congregation. Whenever a congregation gets comfortable, they are, without realizing it, putting one foot in the grave. I don't need to know the details of Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church, but I've seen enough case studies to draw some conclusions. They got comfortable and stopped growing. The story of my wife's home congregation, a Presbyterian congregation in rural Minnesota, is no different than Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church. Much of her family's social life centered on the relationships in their church. Her congregation, when she was a child, was young and thriving. Then one day, in the midst of all this thriving, a wealthy family left the congregation several $1,000,000. Instead of spending the money, they locked it away to ensure the future. And the action slowly killed the congregation. They stopped growing. They stopped serving new families. Their giving on a yearly basis, your stewardship giving, became meaningless because we got all that money in the bank collecting interest. We'll just cover whatever loss is by the interest. The wide open road is easy and comfortable, but it leads to destruction, and they stopped exploring new ways to do ministry. The narrow road, the road that demands we change, is hard. It means taking risk. Worse, it demands time and work. It's a difficult road to travel. Unfortunately, no one wanted to take it, so they slowly died. The doors are still open, but the spirit in that sanctuary left a long time ago. When Peggy's parents moved to the Twin Cities, they were 80 years old, and they were still active in the young parents group of the church. They were in their 80s, and so was everyone else. There were no actual young parents to join. They knew the song, though. They knew the song of "We Used to" very well. I could go on forever and ever telling you about the failed churches I've seen or worked with, but Jesus did not share these words with us to rob us of hope. But they are a warning, and they are an invitation to live differently. Last week, I talked to you about Pastor Bob, one of the pastors that shaped and formed me. When Pastor Bob interviewed to be the new senior pastor of the church, Trinity Lutheran Church in Brooklyn, the church that we serve together, they asked him in his interview one final question. What would you do if we called you to be the senior pastor of the church? His answer was simple and immediate. I'm going to spend all your money. Which I can feel the tension of all the financial people in this congregation right now rising to the surface. Like Peggy's home congregation, Trinity had a $5 million endowment. They were cash and buildings secure, except they were a dying congregation. In 1977, Trinity had 3,000 children and youth in that congregation. By the time we got there in 1989, that number had dropped to 30. 30. The wide road had not paid benefits, so they took a risk. They dared to take the narrow path, and they decided to call Pastor Bob to that congregation. When Peggy and I left Trinity, they had 300 children and youth. And that number continued to grow even more after they left. And one of the great triumphs in that congregation is something I didn't get to actually do, but it's how you start to think differently. The person that took over for us was a good friend of mine, and I told him this idea that I always had, is to combine confirmation with a recreational basketball league. Right? Unbelievable. They went from having 10 kids in confirmation to having 75 because he did it. It was just amazing, but he was thinking outside the box. When 10 years after Pastor Bob took that call and we had left, I asked him how he was doing on spending all that money. He said, Eric, I keep trying, but more keeps coming in. There were 10 other Lutheran congregations in that neighborhood who also had large endowments. Many of them did not choose to walk that narrow road. They are closed today, yet Trinity remains vital. This spring, Marty died. For many of you in the congregation, that name probably means nothing, but he was one of the most important theological minds of the 20th century. His son, Peter, was the senior pastor of St. Paul Lutheran Church, where Peggy and I attended when we lived in Davenport, and that was where my office was located. When we gathered with the congregation to celebrate Martin's passing, I realized how important that place was to me. St. Paul Lutheran Church and Woodward Avenue Presbyterian have in many ways identical beginnings. St. Paul was founded in 1882. They built this big, beautiful church surrounded by the mansions of Davenport. That was a city of great industry. There were lumber barons and railroad lords and shipping kings of Mississippi. They built Davenport. And where that church is located, surrounding it were a number of beautiful mansions. Across the river was a startup company gaining some identity. It was called John Deere. The original church had intricate woodwork in it. Some 15 different types of wood were used. But then the industry started to suffer, and the city experienced the same white flight. And all of a sudden, St. Paul Lutheran Church was surrounded by urban crime instead of wealthy leaders of industry. And in the midst of this, Pastor Marty introduced a controversial idea to the congregation. The big, old, beautiful church was not welcoming, was not user-friendly, was more of a burden than a blessing. He wanted to repurpose that original sanctuary and build a new one. Project was going to cost $13 million, and many families left. They saw it as a wealthy congregation spending unnecessarily. I have to say, even myself, I'm like going, really? Do we have to do that? But I have to admit, in the old sanctuary, I didn't fit in the pews. Like my knees were by my ears when I sat down in those pews. People left, but most stayed and committed themselves. They raised $9 million, built a church, took out a loan for the remaining $4 million. They ended up spending another $6 million, but they paid everything off in 2 years. And a strange thing happened. Worship attendance grew from an average of 800 to over 1,400 a Sunday. And despite the large capital campaign, the congregation grew in its giving outside of the church. When you look at this magnificent structure, you can look at it and see all the money that's spent to maintain it and build it and do all things. What's less visible is all the money that went out. They bought one of those abandoned mansions next to the church and gave it to Vera French, which ran a mental health center for women, single women at risk. They, important to me, they had a camp that had 150 acres. It was 100 acres, and it was just sitting up there. And they could have sold that property and made $1 million. Instead, they gave the money away to a board of directors to create something new, to create a camp that served all the congregations in the Quad City area in eastern Iowa, despite their denomination. One of the things I also loved about that congregation, youth were not allowed to do any fundraisers because the council said, we made a baptismal promise to those children to raise them in the faith. It's our duty to teach them how to serve. It's teach them how to grow, teach them how to connect. Like I said, at Marty's funeral, I realized that's my home congregation. They had a deeper hold on me than any other place. And that congregation beyond Pastor Marty was my family, and that entire community formed me. Now, unlike Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church, today St. Paul has 3,500 members. And of the 10,000 congregations in the ELCA, they remain one of the top 10 congregations in giving outside of their church. Like us, almost 30% of their income goes out into the world. Jesus was right. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a rotten tree cannot produce good fruit. There's no way around it. There is no Costco ministry out there floating around somewhere where you can pay a membership fee and get all kinds of low-cost benefits. It doesn't exist. There's no Walmart out there where you can buy the cheapest thing available and take advantage of it. There's no ministry without money. There's just no ministry without money. And to raise money and to have money, it's work. It's a narrow road. But there's no money without ministry either. You cannot transform the world through social media posts. You cannot transform lives through opinions. Transformation takes energy, it takes effort, it takes patience. I have told you, and I really mean this, I haven't been this high about what's taking place in a building since I was starting my early years at Camp Shalom. When we took a camp of 400 kids and turned it into 1,200. When we took a budget of 90,000 and made it into 750,000. When we took 100 acres and moved it into 300 acres. We're looking around. The transformations that I see in so many ways. Talk to somebody new that's to this congregation, and they will tell you how warmly and lovingly they were greeted on the first time they walked in the building. That's amazing. And I know it would be really nice if this place was overflowing with kids, but right now, the kids in this culture need to have compassion, love, safety, security, trusting relationships that are growing, and they will come. They can find a flood of people. They can find 1 million kids to be with and doing great things, but they can't find that trusting relationship, that security that helps them grow. And that's true of people their age, and it's true of people older than them as well. I'm inviting us to be on a narrow road, to work, to give, to grow, to connect this congregation for the future, because I am 100% confident there is life in doing it. Amen.